A photograph exists. Ordinary, unremarkable, the kind taken by a stranger passing by on a boat, never intended to mean anything. It shows 5 adults standing in a river, thigh-deep water, fishing poles in hand, gathered loosely around a large fallen log, the way people do when they're relaxed, unhurried, enjoying an afternoon that finally, after weeks of punishing heat, felt bearable. The sky is clear, the water looks calm. Nothing in that photograph suggests what is about to happen. Within hours, all 5 of them will be dead. This is the story of what happened along the Scioto River on a Sunday evening in July 2026. Not a story of crime, not a story of blame, but a story of how quickly an ordinary moment can turn catastrophic, and how an act of love and instinct, the impulse to save someone you care about, became the very thing that took 5 lives instead of 1. To understand what happened, you have to understand the river itself. The Scioto River runs for roughly 230 miles through the state of Ohio. It begins in the northwest, cuts southeast through the city of Columbus, and eventually merges with the Ohio River, far to the south, in Portsmouth. Along its route it passes through dozens of communities, some urban, some quiet and residential, offering fishing, scenery, and a sense of calm that draws people to its banks every summer. One of those communities is Powell, Ohio, a suburb north of Columbus. Quiet streets, family neighborhoods, the kind of place where a Sunday evening by the water is a normal, unremarkable way to spend a summer day. The specific stretch of river where this story unfolds sits along what's known as the O'Shaughnessy Reservoir, an 18-mile span of shoreline owned by the city of Columbus. It's a popular recreational area. Bass, saugeye, catfish, and carp swim beneath its surface, drawing anglers throughout the warmer months. But the reservoir has rules. According to the City of Columbus Recreation and Parks Department, swimming, tubing, and the use of jet skis are not permitted anywhere on the reservoir. This is not a minor technicality. It reflects something officials have long understood about this stretch of water, that despite its tranquil appearance, it is dangerous in ways that are not visible from the shore or even from a few feet into the water. That danger would define everything that happened next. The people at the center of this story were not thrill seekers. They were not attempting anything unusual or reckless by the standards of a typical summer weekend. They were a family and an extended circle of friends, doing something millions of people do every year: fishing on a river on a warm afternoon with their children nearby. At the center of the group was 33-year-old Jose Mario Pineda Diaz and his 28-year-old wife, Marina Suyapa Regalado. The couple had brought their 2 children along for what was meant to be a relaxed, low-key outing. A second married couple joined them, along with 1 additional adult friend. 5 adults, 2 children, an afternoon by the water. Investigators would later confirm that 4 of the 5 adults who died were Honduran citizens, members of a close-knit community bound by family ties and friendship, the kind of group that gathers together not for an event, but simply for the pleasure of each other's company. The timing of their outing mattered. Central Ohio had just come through weeks of oppressive, sweltering heat. That Sunday marked a turn. Skies clearing, temperatures finally breaking into something bearable. For a family that had likely spent weeks avoiding the outdoors, it was, by every reasonable measure, a good day to be near the water. They could not have known that the conditions beneath the surface told an entirely different story than the conditions above it. This is the detail that matters most in understanding this tragedy, and the reason officials have spoken so directly about it in the days since. The Scioto River at that stretch was running high and fast, not visibly, not in a way that would alarm someone standing at the edge, or even wading into their thighs. According to United States Geological Survey data, the river's current beneath the surface was moving with far more force than its outward calm suggested. Lieutenant Heather Byers of the Ohio Department of Natural Resources addressed this directly in the aftermath. Rivers, she explained, can be deceptively calm. Even when the water on the surface appears to be barely moving, a person standing in it can still be swept away by currents running underneath. Currents that are, in her words, slow-moving, only in appearance. There is a second hidden danger Lieutenant Byers described, one just as critical to this story: depth. Unlike a swimming pool, a riverbed is not visible, uniform, or predictable. A person standing comfortably in 2 to 3 feet of water can take a single step forward and find themselves suddenly in 4 or 5 feet, enough to lose their footing, enough for the current to take hold, enough for a wave to become a struggle in the span of 1 step. Add to that the other unseen hazards of a natural riverbed, rocks that can catch a foot, submerged branches that can snag clothing, a slick and uneven floor that offers no reliable balance, and you begin to understand how a group of 5 adults, all standing safely in the same spot only minutes earlier, could end up fighting for their lives, one after another. This was the water the group waded into that evening, and this is what turned an ordinary fishing trip into the deadliest kind of accident, one that unfolds in stages, each person entering the water with the sincere belief that they were about to help, not knowing that the water itself was the true danger, and that it did not discriminate between the person struggling and the person reaching out to save them. According to Delaware County Sheriff Jeffrey Balzer, the tragedy began with a single decision, one member of the group entering the river to swim. It was, on its face, an unremarkable choice. People swim in rivers. People wade past where they're fishing to cool off on a hot evening. There was no reason in that moment to expect catastrophe. But almost immediately that person began to struggle. Sheriff Balzer would later describe in stark and simple terms exactly how the situation unraveled. One person got into the river and began struggling in the water. 2 people went in to try to save them. Then those 2 people also began struggling, and that was when 2 additional people entered the water. Read again slowly what that means. This was not one drowning. It was a chain reaction, a sequence of rescues, each one triggered by the failure of the one before it. Each rescuer walking into water that had already proven, moments earlier, that it could overpower a grown adult. There was no way for any of them to have known in real time that going in to help meant placing themselves in exactly the same danger as the person they were trying to save. This is, according to water safety experts, one of the most common and most devastating patterns in drowning deaths involving groups. It is called, in official terminology, a multiple victim drowning, and it happens precisely because human instinct does not pause to calculate risk when someone we love is in danger. It reacts, it moves toward the water, and in rivers like the Scioto, where the danger is invisible until it is too late, that instinct can turn a single emergency into a mass casualty event within minutes. While the tragedy was unfolding in the water, another scene was playing out on dry land, one that would ultimately be the reason help arrived at all. A motorist, driving along Riverside Drive, a quiet, largely residential route running north and south alongside the river, spotted something that did not belong in an ordinary Sunday evening. A young child, alone, frightened, running along the road. This was one of the 2 children who had been part of the group's outing that day. In the chaos unfolding behind them in the water, the child had somehow made their way out of the river and onto the road, running, whether toward help or simply away from what was happening, is something officials have not detailed. What matters is this: had that motorist not been driving along that stretch of road at that specific moment, had they not stopped, had they not called 911, the discovery of this tragedy might have come far later than it did. The motorist's call brought law enforcement to the scene. It was the beginning of what would become, over the following 2 days, one of the most difficult recovery operations Delaware County authorities would carry out that year. Both children from the group, including the child found on the road, were placed into the care of family services in the hours that followed. 2 children, now without the adults who had brought them there that morning, taken into protective custody, while investigators and family members alike began to process what had happened. Emergency crews arrived at the scene near O'Shaughnessy Reservoir Park, along Riverside Drive, just before 9:15 p.m. that Sunday night. What followed was not a rescue. It was, for nearly the first moments, a recovery operation. Search crews working through darkness, then daylight, then darkness again, searching a river that had already shown how effectively it could conceal a person beneath its surface. The first bodies were found that same night. Rescue crews recovered 2 women from the water. Both were pronounced dead after being transported to a hospital. The search continued into Monday. Law enforcement established a staging area in a grassy section along Riverside Drive, the same residential road where the frightened child had been spotted less than 24 hours earlier. About a dozen people, likely family and friends of those still missing, gathered nearby, waiting for information, waiting for confirmation of what many of them likely already understood was inevitable. By Monday, The bodies of 3 men were recovered from the river, confirmed by a spokesperson for the Delaware County Sheriff's Department. 5 adults. A search that began as an emergency response and ended over the course of little more than a day as the recovery of an entire group of friends and family members who had gone out to enjoy a summer evening together. In the aftermath, Sheriff Balzer addressed the public directly, not to assign blame, but to issue a warning, grounded in the details of exactly what had gone wrong. He urged people gathering near rivers and other bodies of water to have basic safety equipment on hand. Life vests, flotation devices, the kind of preparation that, for a stretch of water like the Scioto, a stretch where swimming was already prohibited for exactly this reason, could mean the difference between a frightening moment and an unrecoverable one. It is worth sitting with the timing of this tragedy in the context of what else has happened across the country in the same window of time. Just 2 days before the deaths on the Scioto River, 5 members of a single family were killed in southern Utah after being caught in a flash flood during a canyon hiking excursion. A different state, a different body of water, an unrelated group of people, but a strikingly similar arithmetic of loss. 2 incidents, 10 people, both involving water that looked until the moment it didn't, entirely survivable. This is not a coincidence born of conspiracy or negligence in any singular sense. It is a pattern that water safety officials have been documenting for years. The assumption that calm-looking water is safe water. The assumption that a river you can see the bottom of, or one that isn't visibly churning, poses no serious risk. The assumption ultimately that if something goes wrong, help, in the form of another person nearby, will be enough to fix it. On the Scioto River, that assumption proved fatal 5 times over. What remains in the end is a family that no longer exists in the way it did on Saturday. Jose Mario Pineda Diaz and Marina Suyapa Regalado, a married couple, parents to 2 young children, 33 and 28 years old. A second married couple and a friend who joined them that day will not return home either. 2 children, both under the age of 10, are now in the custody of family services, old enough to have been there, to have seen at least some part of what happened, but young enough that the full weight of what they lost may not fully register for years. There is no perpetrator in this story. No one to arrest, no charges to be filed, no trial to anticipate. What happened on the Scioto River was not a crime. It was something arguably harder to sit with, a demonstration of how thin the line can be between an ordinary afternoon and an irreversible tragedy, and how the very instinct that makes us human, the refusal to watch someone we love struggle without trying to help, can, under the wrong conditions, take everyone down together. The photograph still exists. 5 adults thigh-deep in calm-looking water, fishing poles in hand, gathered around a fallen log on a clear summer afternoon. It was taken by a stranger on a passing boat, who had no way of knowing what he was capturing. The last ordinary moment before an afternoon became a tragedy that a community, a family, and 2 young children will carry for the rest of their lives. If you or someone you know is planning time near rivers, lakes, or reservoirs this summer, officials urge basic precautions. Check local rules on swimming and recreation before entering the water. Wear a life vest or flotation device, even in water that looks calm. And remember that if someone is struggling in open water, calling for professional help is safer, for everyone, than entering the water yourself. Subscribe for more real crime investigations, covered with accuracy and respect.